You'll also make sure that you are optimizing these web pages for performance and scalability. I highlight this right up front now that first it was thought of as really only senior engineers deal with performance optimization, scalability, all those things. But it is becoming so crucial in terms of web development that if you need to stand out in terms of the work you're doing or just kind of be that ultra responsive, ultra fast website to engage and attract more users, this needs to be a fundamental element right from the start.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Hatchpad Insight. I'm Tim Winkler, the creator of Hatchpad, the community for startup technologists. If this is your first time here, don't forget to hit subscribe for updates on new insight interviews like this one. Today, we are chatting with Anand Safi, a startup engineering leader, mentor, and advisor with over 10 years of product development experience. Anand, thanks for hanging out with us at the Hatchpad.
Thank you, Tim, for having me on the show. It's great to talk with you.
Good stuff. Why don't we maybe begin by helping our viewers understand a little bit more of a snapshot of your startup bio and maybe some key highlights from your career?
Yeah, so as you said, I've been in the technology space in general for the last decade. To post my master's in computer science and bachelor's before that, I started working at eBay in a SDAT role. So that was very enterprisey, just a really big company. But then since the past 7-8 years or so, I've been associated with more startups actually than big enterprises. And I think that's where I found my niche in terms of that, I'd say 50 to 500 people company, which is not too scrappy and trying to figure out every single little detail, but it's also not too big or corporate in any sense. So I had my first startup experience with a company in New York City back in 2014. Currently, I work at a company called Mark 43, which is a public safety SaaS company. We recently announced our Series E last week. So we're in hyper growth mode. We're definitely hiring for a lot of roles. But what I was trying to get at is, yeah, I've been in that startup space for the past, I would say, 7-8 years. And I've seen kind of a lot of those things in terms of pivoting, course correcting, operate lean, MVP mindset, 80-20, all these buzzwords, but very real in your day-to-day startup role in a typical week, actually.
Yeah, it's an impressive resume, that's for sure. I mean, I think this is going to be a really good series of talks with you just because of the breadth of experience that you've had and being able to compare from larger organizations to early stage startups to medium-sized startups to large startups. So for now, let's dive right into this discussion. And the question at hand and the topic that we want to cover here is, what are these different development tracks or different roles within technology? What is it that you're seeing right now that's out in the market?
Yeah, tech is just a big umbrella term for so many different career paths and roles, even within the technology kind of landscape. I would break it up into 3 subcategories. So the first is around web development. The second is roles that start with the term data. That's the most easy way to put it or describe it. There is a data analyst, data scientist, data engineer, and then roles that are based on your critical thinking or just your nature to break things or just troubleshoot things. So there are support and ops side, which is just a QA engineering or the software support analyst or technical support engineer. So these are the 3 categories I want to talk about. The first I would start with, the most traditional is web development, where we are seeing even beyond just the normal bachelor's, master's curriculum, the coding boot camps, they have been on the rise a lot in the last 5 years. And that is one of the most hot areas in terms of just becoming a developer, actually. Many times what happens is the most common entry point to web development is becoming a front-end engineer or a UI developer. And what you might end up doing in this role is basically you are leveraging the 3 most common core elements, which are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There are a ton of frameworks, libraries, but still you need to be solid in terms of these 3 things because a lot of things are just still based on JavaScript on the front end as the core language. And with the help of these 3 things, you will be designing or implementing web pages. So just any website or things that we use on a day-to-day, you will be building that front end user-facing experience using a combination of these 3 things. You might also be doing a lot of improvement of the user experience in terms of if there's an existing web page, you might need to tweak. That is where there's a lot of CSS heavy skills. or just ways to make sure that you're able to do those reworks. A lot of the times we see that an app or a website has changed their layout completely, right? Like a major revamp and all that. So you need to be good at also working with existing modules and changing that. Lastly, you'll also make sure that you are optimizing this web pages for performance and scalability. I highlight this right up front now that first it was thought of as really only senior engineers deal with performance optimization, scalability, all those things. But it is becoming so crucial in terms of web development that if you need to stand out in terms of the work you're doing or just kind of be that ultra responsive, ultra fast website to engage and attract more users, this needs to be a fundamental element right from the start. So definitely look at those kind of things on the code you're writing. How much time does it take to run? Is it a lot of just duplication that you're doing? Is it a lot of things that are being required? Like you need only 3 things, but you are including 10 things on every page load. So it will all make sense when you dive deep, but those are some high level considerations that also are a part of a front end developer's role. The next is around the backend development. Some core responsibilities of a backend developer are definitely first working closely with the front end team, because if they are the kind of facade, you are the mechanic on how all this data that your user is seeing in terms of a web page, this fancy images or just all these CSS animations, all these are just coming from a centrally hosted place, ideally for cloud infrastructure. The server endpoints are just a big part of that. All the data that is API communication protocols in terms of REST, SOAP, or just methods of how you are interfacing with the front end and passing data back and forth is really important in that regard. You might also be building kind of just a rule-based system. The server is also strictly based on some set of fixed processing rules, right? So you need to make sure that if user hits, say, the like button on a Facebook, actually, you are responding to that based on your rule that if a like button is hit, you increment the count by +1. You need to have that behavior coded. That will be done on the front end, but there is kind of a rules-based algorithm or system in terms of how you respond to certain user events and interaction. Plus, the backend developer's server is still a middle layer in terms of the ultimate database where all this data is stored, retrieved, or originating from. So you need to do 2 things. You first need to acknowledge the front end in terms of the user action and anything that you need to make it available, but you also need to reach out to the database and either store that data or grab some data that the front end is needing to display. So if I say view photo on the front end, that basically makes a request to the backend that get me this photo. The backend dev has to code the logic that I need to go to the database at the photos table, get the key of this user who's trying to retrieve their photo, get that image or whatever that is, pass it back. So the front end can then display that in whatever the layout that they have put out. So that is just front end versus back end. Nowadays, we see more commonly full stack, which is a combination of those two, actually. In a nutshell, they're just kind of common skills of front end and back end devs. It is becoming more and more popular now because we have now identified ways that we can code entire systems end to end using a single language as the core. So before, you thought that front end was JavaScript and most of the back end was done in something else. But now there is possibility with Node.js or just this new frameworks like Express that you can build entire end-to-end systems using just JavaScript as your guiding technology or coding language. So it's increasingly common for engineers to pick up one language and do end-to-end development, especially for applications that don't need much backend logic, right? If you're having just routes or kind of storing or updating databases and you don't have complex logic in there, it's easy to spin up systems. And that's why full stack development comes into picture, actually. That is the one category about web development. The second is around data. So 3 things in there, which is data analyst, data engineer, and data scientist. So in a nutshell, data analyst is simply the analysis part of existing data that is available or flowing through your system. So you need to analyze the available data in terms of maybe writing queries or joins or just trying to make connections or connecting the dots. Like there might be a lot of isolated data in different tables or different places that is available. You need to be able to have that intuition that what is the business question that I'm trying to solve at how many users bought my product within 3 to 4 p.m. yesterday, and their order total, say, was more than $1,500, for example. That is a combination of many things, right? All that data might be stored in different places, a users table, an orders table, then there's some order value table in terms of the threshold, and you need to join or just come up with your analysis and your answer based on that exercise you do. So data analysis is simply just analyzing existing data that can help make companies better decisions actually. Data engineer is more around preparing data. So they develop and then clean up and maintain data related architectures actually. So data engineer is more commonly used in terms of various ETL data pipelines in that regard. And they ensure that data is accurate. So deduping stuff, extensible, all those kind of things that are important in terms of higher knowledge of SQL, knowledge of data architecture and pipelining, and then also knowledge of data visualization tools. The last and the most sophisticated is data scientist, where there's a lot of statistical skill involved because we're talking about modeling and data mining, and there is definitely machine learning principles, right? So the most common are the SAS, R, or Python data science scripting mechanisms. There is Hadoop-based analytics that goes into there. And then there's also things in terms of trying to carry out operational models that go beyond just analyzing existing data. So there's only a finite amount of data you can analyze through data analysts and signals you can answer, but you need to kind of make your system smart at the end of the day, that it's able to understand in real time that I have seen this type of data or signal before, and I know based on my training that when this signal comes, this is the kind of response I need to provide to the user that will probably give us the maximum chance of a user interaction. So that is why there's all statistical modeling in that regard, that you're able to make your own technology smarter day by day in terms of being able to automatically respond and be dynamic in the sense. So that is just really at a high level data analysis versus the data engineer ETL part versus the data science part. The last is in terms of software support and QA roles. I started my career as a QA. I am really, really thankful that I did, because I'll touch first on the QA part. The quality assurance aspect is basically somebody giving you a free pass and saying that I think this is perfect. Can you prove me wrong? And we know for a fact that there's no such thing as perfect. Everybody makes human mistakes. Even as a QA engineer, I was not able to catch every single thing, else we would have no production bugs or issues out there. But that form of creative space just helped me kind of go beyond normal manual testing of functionality. So if somebody told me that we have implemented that like button example for Facebook, then I would just click the like button once and the like count will increment by +1. I'm done with my happy path in 30 seconds. And I would say, yes, the acceptance criteria is met, but then I'll spend the next 10 minutes in terms of when does it not work? What if I hit it 10 times? Does it update the count? Does it crash? What if I were able to hit the like button and then reload the page in a split second? Does it lose count or state in that regard? What if I hit the like button and turn my network off? How does it work in terms of offline connectivity? And this is where it really shows the quality of your web development in terms of how are you handling those server round trips in terms of users end-to-end experience. So there's just ways that made me happy in terms of just how to holistically think as a user that even if you nail down your 10 user personas and 50 ways that a user might use your workflow, you will end up discovering a totally random way that a particular user might end up in a certain place. So trying to think through on what that might be is great. That role really helped in my own development journey when I became a front-end engineer after being a QA engineer, because it gives you the user aspect of things, right? Whatever I am building in terms of the front-end experience, how is it going to be used, or how somebody might perceive that it should be used actually. And that helped me kind of just course correct in terms of my development and building out the interactions and edge case handling. The last role that I'll talk about is in terms of software support. which is great in terms of its technical support on actual production incidents that is going on actually. And here you have firsthand experience in terms of how your system is being used by the end user, plus how your system is configured. Oftentimes what happens is you build something to be rolled out or configured a certain way. Think of it as a last mile delivery. When the software is about to go out, it is kind of being put out to the user in a totally different way that the engineering team didn't know or thought about, or probably there was some disconnect in that regard. So at a support level, first off, you have first an experience of knowing how your software is being used or your product is being used. And you can leverage that technical support role to go into these other roles and build experiences because you know for a fact that, okay, if I build something, this is how it will be used. So you already are one step ahead. For the software support role, it's definitely one of the most external facing technical roles. All the other roles are very internal engineering focused, but you need to have great interpersonal and communication skills in terms of dealing with a customer, being able to explain some technical thing that is happening in a non-technical fashion or semi-technical fashion to the customer actually. And all these soft skills or human skills will be really valuable when you go into some other internal focused engineering role because you will be able to communicate, collaborate, speak about your work, have technical discussions with other people. Yeah, I think that's probably it in terms of the tech umbrella, at least the first part, the developer-centric roles, the data-centric roles, and then the more kind of critical thinking support and QA-centric roles.
Yeah, that's a really helpful breakdown. I love the idea of just breaking this into 3 tracks and dissecting each of those tracks as to the different outlets you can pursue. I've got just a follow up question on a couple of these. You mentioned a lot of individuals coming out of coding boot camps. It's a great outlet to help solve the talent marketplace crisis of software engineering talent. Is there more of a common track that individuals go into coming out of coding boot camps? Is it more front end focused, or is it also data or QA positions that you can kind of come through?
I think the coding bootcamps are primarily focusing a lot on the front end or the full stack development aspect. As I said, build your website or build a to-do list end to end in terms of just using front end technologies and some form of extended backend, but still based on JavaScript, like Node and Express are really common in that regard. A lot of these bootcamps are on that focus. Google recently did a free data bootcamp on Coursera. There's definitely a lot of data-centric bootcamp that is coming up, but I am not sure if there's any support or QA-centric coursework. It's difficult to teach because each production system and configuration is different. So you need to at least be passionate and show potential. And that is where we find a lot of entry-level roles as well, starting as a manual tester or just starting as a software support analyst, because you are able to consume a decent amount of information in short time and able to respond to people externally and give them at least a high level lay of the land. You're not solving or fixing any issues. You're just able to understand the current issues and then explain the timeline or what potentially the team is doing around that. That is a good entry point. But based purely on the bootcamp side of things, we definitely see front end is more common in that regard. I'd be surprised if somebody came from immersive coding bootcamp and joined as one of the preferred Java engineers. It's definitely difficult to teach Java, JavaScript, Ruby, or multiple languages in a short period of time. And also what happens with boot camps is there's a lot of information available to you in a short span of 3 to 6 months. That's why HTML, CSS, JavaScript work together really well in terms of building a complete experience. And there's more tangible outcome. People often prefer that as their kind of entry point, and then seeing if they're more interested in just the DevOps infrastructure backend side of things and making progress or just kind of following along those. One term I mentioned is DevOps. Those kind of certifications or courseworks are also emerging in terms of infrastructure and cloud. AWS certifications, like SaaS-based certifications, Azure certification. You can go deep in just a particular tool or technology and be a specialist there. But more commonly, I would say entry-level software engineer, entry-level manual tester, or entry-level technical support engineer, or an entry-level data analyst. Just do a SQL course, right? SQL bootcamp for 3 months, and you're solid there. those are kind of good entry points to begin with.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, DevOps is an area that we could probably have an entire episode dedicated to and some of the ins and outs of that space. But let's keep it within these tracks that we outlined. Another question that I had for you was, are there specific backend languages that you think are more common in a full stack engineer? And what would some of those languages be?
Java is still really preferred, or even PHP is also done in that regards. But I would say when it comes to purely full stack, I've seen the full stack side emerge more from the front end side of things, actually. A lot of the full stack backend languages are based on just those front end languages. And that's why the most common that we see, as I said, is Node.js in terms of just developing backend side of things.
Excellent. One of the questions I have specific to the data track, data scientist, is this an area where folks might find entry level data science openings, or is it more likely that they went and started as a data analyst and maybe evolved into a data scientist, or are folks pursuing a PhD and coming into a data science role?
I think that was definitely more convoluted a few years back in terms of data analyst was an entry point, and you thought that there was a hierarchical structure like data analyst to data engineer to data scientist. There has been a lot of, I would say, master level programs in terms of data science. Somebody would be doing that where their coursework is geared around building modeling or predictive analytics using R scripting or Python scripting or PyChart, PyTorch, all those things in that regard. So there's definitely more specialized learning around data science for master's level students. I also see as a counterpart of that, there are two type of roles coming up, which is junior data scientist or data science intern. It's not necessary that you need to be a data analyst always. There's a lot of internships for data science that are coming up, which are complementing these programs that are starting up. Similar to the front-end coding bootcamp, you could do a 3-month data science bootcamp and become a data scientist unless you have a degree in statistics modeling or something that just adds to your value or knowledge. But there's definitely a little bit more learning curve and time needed with those roles. So either a degree or some form of prior experience in the data field is important. But there are definitely roles coming up in terms of data science intern and then junior data scientists that companies are kind of okay giving people that opportunity actually.
Excellent. Yeah, really helpful feedback. I think this is a great starting point to kind of put this overview of the different development tracks for our community members that are interested in exploring these different pieces or areas of technology. I appreciate and enjoy the original conversation here that we've been able to have with you, Anand. Thanks so much for providing this overview. And I want to remind all of our viewers to stay tuned for the second part of this series, where Anand will define a framework that startup technologists can use when deciding which of these tracks may be best suited for their specific career path. But for now, thanks so much again for all of your information. This is really helpful.
Thank you so much, Tim. It was great to talk. I definitely presented a lot of information. So I hope people were able to kind of at least get the gist of different kind of categories in terms of umbrella roles for tech, and then at least have an initial sense of what they would like to pursue or experiment with actually.
Excellent. Thanks again, Anand, and we'll talk with you in a couple weeks.
Great. Thank you, Tim. Nice talking to you. Yeah, looking forward to our next one.